Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Blame It on Marketing with Emma Ruta. We are rejoined today by Greg, who you will have seen on a previous episode where we were talking about conversion rate optimization. So it's very good if you want to check that out. But we are going to be talking about something slightly different today with Greg, and we'll tell you all about it in just a minute. But Greg, for those of our audience who haven't met you before, please introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Greg. I'm the head of marketing for a company called Lido. Like Emma was saying, we are in the business of conversions and conversion rates. So making your website convert better. We're a piece of tech that helps you do that. But today I am talking with more of my international hat on. And if you can tell from the twang in the voice, the accent is from South Africa. So props if you guessed that.
I literally got asked by a cabbie from London, in London the other day. He's like, "You're South African." And I'm like, "No, can't even do it if I try." So Greg's the legit South African here, if anyone's ever wondering.
Apparently not, because the first time I met you, I also guessed South African. So
Maybe I do it so well, I don't even know. Who knows? Anywho, before we dive into the topic of the episode, we are doing this new thing where we ask for a marketing confession. Now, Greg was there in our original confession days, which was at an event that we did together, but we would still like to know if you've got anything else to add. Maybe something's happened since.
Well, thankfully not as stressful as this, but when I was, so before I joined Lido, I worked in agencies for 10 years. So in fairness, I have all kinds of confessions and mishaps that happened in different agencies. But the worst one, at the time, the worst one was we were doing a PPC campaign for a client, like quite a big one across social media. It was, a reasonably small client, but like they'd put quite a lot of budget behind it. It was the first time they'd spent that much. And on one of the channels, it was, Facebook back then, Meta now, I added an extra zero in the budget column when I was putting the ads live. And for that particular ad set, it was a very short one. It was only running for about a week or so. And I added an extra zero, which for them was a lot of money, which they had never spent that kind of stuff before. And by the time I realized it the next day, I'd gone through a seventh of that budget with an extra zero in. And that was one of the least fun conversations I've ever had with a client in the agency world. But PPC in particular, I've had tons of these. So I've had like people in my teams that I was managing, for instance, like stop and start campaigns because clients like wanted them paused and then turned back on, but then not changed like campaign dates. So like budget again gets spent in a very concentrated space of time, just like human errors. But when you're dealing with a large chunk of someone else's PPC budget, it's just one of the worst feelings. Because obviously, Facebook or Google or any of these big companies, there's nobody you can talk to. There's no way you can reclaim it. There's no you just have
that was a mistake. Can I have
my money? You just got to hold the hand up and beg forgiveness and hope you don't get fired.
Unless the ad converts really well, right? And then in which case, thank me later. Just saying.
Yeah, just here's all your leads.
That definitely didn't happen for me.
Before your Lido days, mate, was missing that conversion rate optimization piece, maybe.
Sure.
Jokes. No, I'm sure you know how to do it.
Appreciate the plug.
Wonderful. Emma, do you want to kick us off with our first question?
Obviously, as Greg has alluded to, we are going to talk about what it's like to market globally and what it means to also work globally in terms of, working with teams across different departments in different time zones and all of that jazz, because it's something that more and more we all have to try and do, even if you work in a sexy startup that lets people work anywhere around the world. That comes with a level of complication. So we're going to talk through all of that. So I guess, Greg, how hard is it to actually market globally? And do you think large companies ever actually manage to do this very well?
So it's very hard. It's not easy. And I think some large companies do, but that's just because they have resources to do it, right? So they can afford to hire local people on the ground or even work with, different agencies in different countries to do real good localization pieces. They can afford the best translators. They probably have employees in all the different countries they want to market to. It's an easier game. When you're an SME, it is very, very hard. For me, for instance, I work at, like a scale up. and we operate across quite a few different markets. Our company's headquartered in Finland, for instance. So I have to spend a lot of time working with people in Finland to make the marketing messaging that me and my team are pumping out, mostly from the UK, work in that territory. But then we have to do it for, Spain and lots of different markets across Europe. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult on kind of low resources and low budget. And what I would say, though, is that even large companies don't get it right. And there's some quite famous mishaps of big brands doing things very wrong on an international level. One of my favorites that it's from years ago, but I still laugh about it. Pampers, the nappy, the diaper brand, they did a massive launch in Japan, and they had storks, cartoon storks, appear in all the marketing and advertising because we all think in the West of storks delivering babies as like the famous story. In Japan, that's not a thing. So Japanese customers were just massively confused why these birds were showing up on diaper commercials and nobody knew what it meant. And things like that. Even large companies get it wrong. So what I would say is if you are in a smaller company and you are finding that some of the messaging is missing the mark or it isn't localized enough, it's hard. Big companies get it wrong. And you feel like it's all on you as a marketer, but really it's on your company and other people in the company to help you with these kind of things. Because I, for instance, before I joined Lidu, had no perception of what the average Finn consumer is into or not into. So I have to rely on other people in the business. And if you're not getting that support, you are doing an impossible task, really.
Yeah. One of the things that stands out for me as well, having done this similar setup, Greg, especially where I've been based in the UK and been the EMEA team with a HQ somewhere else, America or Australia, is that there is also the company culture side of things. So it's not only is there the kind of you need to get the marketing messages right, but it's also how the hell do you work with each other? I don't know if you guys have, I'm sure you have experienced that as well, but it's not always as easy as you think. Even if you are working with other Western nations, I have found that sometimes is as complicated as working with people who are, based in the Middle East or based in Southeast Asia. How have you found that, Greg? And do you think that's a big element? Because sometimes otherwise your marketing is going to miss the mark because you can't even communicate effectively with each other.
So when I did my first interview for my job at Lidu, it was with one of the founders who's a Finnish guy. And I did this interview. I was, giving it everything I had, thought I was coming up with some good stuff. And I was just getting nothing back. No small talk, no smiling, straight faced. And I literally, the first thing I said to my partner when I got off the interview is, I will never hear from that company ever again. And it's, stuff like that. So the best piece of advice I actually got from a non-Finn when I started this job was, if you get silence, that means they like you and you're doing a good job, because they're just comfortable enough to sit in silence and nod and say fine. Where you would be in trouble is if they were coming back at you, because they have, it's not like the British trying to be polite. They have no problem telling you, even if they don't know you very well, no, you're wrong, I disagree, we're not doing that. So silence is good in that context. But it is, it's very different, and it's very challenging at times. So as much as kind of about half the people I work with are Finnish or Scandinavian, a lot of my team is actually Spanish. So I'm remote based in the UK, and the office I visit the most, paradoxically, is in Malaga. So we have quite a big marketing team out in Malaga. Side note, if anyone is looking for Malaga food suggestions, Ruta is definitely the person to talk to. She took me to the best brunch place in Malaga. I'll swear by that. But, obviously Spanish are completely different as well. Very different people, quite, very expressive, quite emotional. They work in a completely different way than the Finnish. It's, there's one of the big learning curves for me has been around how those two markets in particular treat the summer, and how basically July and August is no-go if you need anything done when you're dealing with Scandinavians or even Spanish to a degree. Whereas in the UK, where a lot of my other team are based, we're all working nonstop throughout the summer. People might take a week or two off, but, we're still kind of business as usual. So there's infinite different challenges with different cultures. And I think the best advice I would give to a marketer trying to do that for the first time is it isn't it isn't on you to try and make everybody happy and everybody feel comfortable with how you operate or how your culture operates versus theirs. You've been hired to do a job, right? And if your job spans different regions or different cultures, you have to get on with doing that, particularly if you're the one setting the strategy in the best way that you can think of. But as difficult as it is, part of your job isn't going to be making sure that everyone is culturally on the same page or feels comfortable with the same thing. People are different. They're all going to have nuances. They're all going to have different ways of working. And as long as you're trying to implement what you think is the correct thing from a marketing point of view, it's not on you to solve the cross-cultural communications of your entire business. I don't think anyone would ever be able to do that.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. I was going to say, yeah, I hope you bring up the summer holidays thing, because I worked for a Swedish company way back when, and yeah, July, August comes and like you need something from someone in Sweden and it's just crickets. Like everyone is gone, or like somebody's on for like 2 days to check their email and then they're like off for another month. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I always thought that was quite funny. But apart from the cultural side of things, and I guess there's a kind of straight up raw translation of things. What are the kind of key challenges around global marketing that you come up against regularly?
So one thing that you see a lot, and fair enough, people don't have infinite resources to spend on this stuff, so it's obvious why someone would do this. But one thing I do see a lot is someone will set the global marketing strategy and all the messaging, and then they will just go to however many different countries they want to operate in and just do direct translations of that. And that's kind of missing the mark on two levels. One is not everything is going to translate like you think it's going to translate. So another like real famous one is KFC. When they went into China, obviously their slogan is finger licking good, right? Now a literal translation of that in China came out as eat your fingers. And stuff like that. If you just hired someone to translate my words that I've written in my context, that isn't going to work in a lot of places. But the second reason that misses the mark is you would be assuming that every different country is going to have the same kind of buyers who need the same kind of messaging that your global strategy is set at, and that's just never going to be the case. So Lidu is quite a young business. Lidu's only been in business about 5 or 6 years, but we've only been in the UK, where I'm based, for like just over 2. And so what we find is that, so we sell to marketers, by the way. Like the most common job title that would buy us is like a head of marketing. We find that in Finland or Sweden, the average head of marketing knows who we are and might know our features and kind of what we sell. Whereas because we're a lot younger in the UK and there's a lot more heads of marketing in different contexts, we find that the average person doesn't. Like they aren't familiar with everything that we have. So if I was to just take the global or the Finnish messaging and feature lists and collateral, and I was to just translate all of that into English, that would mean very little to a CMO or a head of marketing based in the UK who's never even heard of us, right? So what I need here is a much more top of the funnel approach. I need messaging that's written for a completely different stage of the kind of research and buying journey compared to what I need in Scandinavia. And that's, even though I'm selling to the same job title in the same kind of companies and the same everything, if I just directly translate, it's kind of useless marketing in a lot of ways. So that taking whatever the global messaging is and then I'll just find 50 different people who translate this into all the languages, like that isn't, I wouldn't call that marketing.
You've got to acknowledge, it's like, especially like obviously in the marketing context, that's one, but like we've seen it a lot with HR tech where people are like, oh, we'll just translate this into French. Or even one of the biggest mistakes I've seen people be is like, we'll just sell to the US, but the US has completely different governance around how they manage their employees, all of those different things. And work culture, yeah, all of those different things. It's not as straightforward as like we're just going to sell into this market because we think it's easier or whatever you're going to do. There has to be a bit more thought process with that. I wonder like what your guys' thoughts are about having boots on the ground, because I think obviously I know that's very difficult for a lot of businesses, especially if you're smaller, but you've got some, let's say you've got some customers in the US or something, and you're like, oh, we think maybe we should expand out into that. Is it kind of a mistake to think you can do that like on like low resource and low budget?
Yeah, I think so. But an even more like an even worse idea that I do see come up is, oh, we'll just hire one person and they'll be like the point person for everything to do with America. It's like, yeah, good luck. So, yeah, I think boots on the ground, particularly without like a proper investment strategy behind it, is or a go to market strategy is very risky. But there is a way around that with low resources, which is virtual boots on the ground. So you can hire really good people even through things like Fiverr, or you can work. There's a lot of companies that literally specialize in helping people go to market remotely in different countries or regions. So you don't have to have full-time employees to do it. You don't have to have all the resources in the world to do it. But if you haven't got someone who can do more than translation, as in if you haven't got someone that can help with localized messaging or localized market research or understanding personas in that country, or understanding like martech where I work, all of the nuances around privacy legislation in the EU versus the US, like if you haven't got, whether it's remote or full-time or freelance, if you haven't got someone who understands the localization piece, like we were saying earlier, translations in and of themselves, or having a person in and of themselves, is basically worthless.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think boots on the ground is necessarily necessary anymore, especially in when we work in B2B SaaS. But I think it's that intimate knowledge of the region that's important. And I think we've all probably gone through a period in our companies where they're trying to sell in the US, and the notion usually is boots on the ground, like blah blah blah. But I think the biggest problem with selling to the US is just straight up resource cost. It's a huge market and with huge variation, and you need to know it very 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 well, which I think people think boots on the ground is the equivalent to that, but I don't think that's true at all. And you need to put lots of resources into it. So I think, as sexy as it is thinking of expanding, maybe not even into the US, just into different countries, there's this like whole upfront research, basically piece that's going to dump a lot of resources into. That's going to dump who's it that you're going to dump a lot of resources into before you ever get any sales or any product market fit. And it's almost it's less about taking your product to another country, and it's more like revalidating your product again for those consumers rather than the ones that you know already. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but that's also where the company culture piece tends to fall apart, or at least that's what I've seen, where people do make this kind of mistake where they're like, we'll get one person in the US or Australia or wherever, or in EMEA, and we'll get that person to kind of do everything, and then those people always feel beholden to the HQ, wherever that might be, and therefore like sometimes their view is basically taken as the regional view, and therefore not as important and not as critical as the kind of head office kind of view. But you might have a bigger market, or you whatever it might be, and that again, that's where this tension is created to like, oh, we're just going to do whatever we want because and I worked in a company that was like this basically, and everything that we tried to do in EMEA ended up being vetoed constantly, because it was a bit like we were trying to say, no, actually we can't sell like this in the UK. And that's just UK, but we were EMEA, so it's like you can't sell like that to Germany, and you can't sell like, and you can't replicate that because even Europe is so complex. To have it that as like one region was really really complicated, whereas the other kind of regional offices was Australia and US, and it's like kind of they've only got to sort of handle one market, whereas even Europe is so many different markets mixed into one. And yeah, like I say, I don't recall I took this company off my LinkedIn. Everyone knows this story already, but it's because it was such a shambles. And I was like, I was there for 6 months and we didn't get any work out of the door, basically, because yeah, everything from the head office was completely vetoed all the time, which is kind of what leads me to my next question. I've kind of already given you an example of where it all goes wrong. But what are some of the worst things that you've seen happen when you try to market globally, where you've got one single HQ that kind of dictates everything down?
Yeah, and so like there's that Pampers or that KFC example earlier. Those are like obvious examples of that. But and I think to that point, if you don't have market research about new territories or new countries you're going into, doesn't matter how successful your global marketing has been, there's a chance it will fail. So like an example about this that I like is, so everybody thinks of Starbucks as everywhere, right? Like anywhere in the world you can get Starbucks, fine. Like, did you know that Starbucks only opened its first store in Rome last year? So one of the most touristy cities in the world, most visited cities in the world, massive, 2 million people or whatever it is. First Starbucks wasn't until 2023 in Rome.
And I think their first ever was in Milan, and there's only one Starbucks in Milan. I've been to it. It's incredible, by the way. They've got a whole bar. By the way, culture-wise, they have a bar inside. Yeah, they have a whole bar, like alcohol bar inside. So talk about different cultures, because you would not find that in the UK or the US probably. But yes, please continue.
No,
I
but
love my little
that's
Starbucks
like
facts.
exactly, you said it for me. Like, that's an example of a company that, in fairness, did do its market research and didn't just say, "Oh, we should be operating in Italy," and they've actually looked into it over 40 years and said, "No, this isn't going to translate at scale, because Italians don't want quick coffee everywhere. They want local, independent, generally quite small coffees from their local cafe and barista that they know. And there's a community element to coffee in Italy that doesn't exist in America or lots of places. And in fairness to them, they haven't tried to force it. They've said, we know we cannot do this at scale in Italy. And that's an example of doing it well. And to your question, Emma, it would be so easy, right, for a C-suite or a business type to come in and be like, we sell to lots of places in Europe already. Italy is the fourth biggest economy in Europe. They've got the massive consumer base. We should be selling in Italy. And how often do C-suite people come in and say things like that? And then marketing's job is to work out, or to try and tell them, like, actually, this probably isn't going to work. And
or we're going to need fuck tons of money.
yeah, exactly. Like, oh no, I think we need to hire 3 people in Italy to do this, and then inevitably the answer is no. So without that planning and research, and without that kind of level of marketing insight, or just market research in general, if you try and just replicate what you've done in lots of different countries, it is never going to work as well as the original.
I've seen you guys at one event, which is where we met, but I assume you do most of your events to that standard, and you guys absolutely smashed it. At the event I saw you, and super engaging. Like, it's a standard conference stand setup, but Lido are just great. Do you find that even the way you do events translates to other countries, maybe? Or is that even, tightly within the marketing community, within your product, still something that you adapt when you maybe are showcasing in somewhere else in Europe?
Yeah, so thank you. That's very rewarding to hear, because you have, I was going to say you have no idea, but you probably do have an idea of how stressful something like that was to set up. But for me in particular, because obviously it's marketing's job. But yeah, I think the biggest thing with events for us in different cities and countries is there is definite cost issues, as in, like, it's much harder for me to go to like Web Summit in Lisbon than it is to go to London for an event, and ditto for most of my team. But another thing that we are very conscious of with events in different countries is how many customers we have in those countries, because it would be very easy to be like, look, we've only got a handful of customers in Holland. We should go and do loads of events in Amsterdam to get that number up, because we've got a small base of customers, but it's a largely English-speaking market. We could easily translate what we're doing into Holland. But what we've found from just doing small experiments with that kind of thing is, it only really works well in places where we've got quite low brand awareness. As in, if we did loads of events in Scandinavia, where I was saying earlier, most marketers already know kind of what Lido does broadly. What we find is like, we get people to the stand and it's like, oh yeah, I know you, I remember the logo, whatever. But what they then see on the stand doesn't impress them as much as places that haven't, you know, where we've got comparatively low awareness. And so this to that point is why we do so many events in the UK. Because what I was saying earlier is my issue in the UK is completely the opposite of Scandinavia. Whereas my job in the UK is to try and get the average marketer to know what we do and maybe have seen a little bit of our platform. And events are an amazing way to do that, because you can get anybody on an event as long as you grab their attention, and you can give anybody a 2-minute demo on an event. Whereas it's far harder for me to do that through digital ads or, you know, lots of other different channels. So events for us in the UK are great because, you know, to your point, we turn up with quite eye-catching signs and we do some quite fun things at events to try and flag people down. And the moment we've done that, and the moment we can start bringing out the tablets and showing them the platform, people are like, oh, okay, I'd never seen this, but this is cool. Whereas in Scandinavia, people are, you know, they might not even get to that stage of viewing the tablet because they're like, oh yeah, I know Lido, I've seen that logo before, I'm not going to stop at the stand. So the event planning aspect for us is really about, ironically, where we don't have as much awareness, and then seeing if we can get something out of doing an event for the first time there. But I mean, the obvious drawback to trying to do events in different countries is the cost and the time and the logistics, because you do need your team members doing it. As in, I wouldn't want to outsource that to like a freelancer to sit on my stand and talk on behalf of Lido. So
yeah,
it
that makes
comes
sense.
down
Yeah,
to a money thing.
yeah, it's almost like another version of boots on the ground, right? But even then, you need to make sure you do it really, really well and have all that research, and again, know at what point the buyers in that market are, and at what point you need to hit them, and that kind of thing. So yeah, that makes total sense.
So, if you were going to start trying to think about how you might expand into another territory from a kind of like from the actual marketing message point of view, and the activities that you do, and also how would you try and counter some of the company culture stuff? I know you were sort of saying earlier on you can't keep everybody happy, but there are some basic stuff you could do to kind of like make sure everything is working effectively. Where would you start, and what are some of the things you might do?
So again, I would, as much as I could, I would try and start from like a facts and a research base, as in, have we done research about going into this territory? What does it say? What do we need to be aware of kind of culturally and from an audience and persona point of view if we're trying to sell to whatever country it is?
What kind of things would you say are most important for you, like in that research? What questions are you looking to hit?
Yeah, so I would start with things like what competitors are big in that market compared to, you know, the HQ market. I would start with our, you know, what is the size of our buying personas? So for us, how many heads of marketing operate in this country? What industries are they generally in? Does that broadly match to what we consider our kind of HQ ICP? I would look at things as well like what how difficult would it be for us, or how expensive, I suppose is another way of looking at it, would it be for us to replicate not the messaging but some of the channel strategies that have worked in other countries? So like, how expensive would it be to run certain kinds of ads, or to set up a website, you know, basic day-to-day operations. But I would generally start from that consumer persona research base, like, how many people can I sell to who meet my criteria in this country? What do they already use compared to what do people in my market use? And how easy would it be, or difficult would it be, to bring our product and get it in front of them? But once I've got that, and once you've set a strategy around that, to the point about internal comms and cross-cultural stuff, it's far easier for people to buy into that vision if they are boots on the ground in that market, if they can see, okay, we have done this research to suggest this will work, or we have done this research to suggest we need to change all of these things about how we currently market our product. So, for instance, if I was employed by Lido to be the boots on the ground in South Africa, I would feel a lot more confident knowing that, okay, here's a report determining here's local competitors in South Africa versus the EU. Here's a whole piece around privacy legislation in Africa compared to Europe. I, as a boots on the ground, would feel far more bought in doing that. And then whatever kind of cultural differences I have with the HQ market, like I say, it's natural for us as marketers to feel that that's on us, but it isn't. Our job is to be prepared, to have a strategy that we plan to execute. And if you can prove that you've got that local strategy that's well thought out, well researched, has actual intent behind it, as opposed to here is translated versions of all of our existing collateral, then I think you're far more likely to get people being like, okay, I can see the vision behind this. I can see what needs to change. I can see how I need to talk about this. But without that kind of base piece of research, if you just employ people in the local market and say, go translate these 25 sales decks, do they really believe deep down that this is going to be a successful launch?
Absolutely. And what do you think senior management should be thinking about when preparing to run a global marketing campaign or set up a global marketing function?
Kind of that not everything is going to work everywhere. And that's hard to get across sometimes, because to like that example we used earlier, it's natural for a C-suite or a non-marketing business professional to look at, here's how many people live in a country, or here's the size of the economy, or here's how many heads of marketing operate in a certain country, and think, oh, if we could just grab 5% of that audience, that translates to X number of dollars. But to have the realization that that isn't going to happen by just doing everything we did in the UK in Brazil, or everything that we did in the US in Malaysia. Like, it's not going to translate in the same way. You're going to have a whole host of local competitors or concerns or issues. And if you just look at, okay, here's how many potential dollars I think I can make in this country versus how much I need to put in to launch, you better have a very good global marketing strategy, because otherwise you're not going to hit the number.
Well, yeah, it's even like regionally, like some of the regions just aren't as mature, or countries aren't as mature. They're not as forward in their kind of the way that people market to them. So it's like all of a sudden you might find that someone's got a print strategy if they're marketing in maybe, I don't know, some of the Middle East countries that you might think is completely mad, but actually that's what works. And it's like it can be as different as that, can't it? It's like literally the full scale of things. Like, in China don't have access to all of the kind of apps that we do. So it's kind of like, even just that alone is some of the stuff that people need to think through. And yeah, you're right. People do go down, the senior leaders do go down that route of going, let's just grab up 5% of that market.
Yeah.
Good luck.
I think it's also important to just mention, so I always like going back to the 4 P's of marketing because I like it as a structure, but we're kind of mainly talking about placement and position. The other 2 bits that are untouched usually are product and pricing by marketing. And I think pricing is a huge one for different locations. So even understanding what the normal pricing is within the region, and then looking at how you're priced, because that's probably going to be a big barrier if you get it wrong. And it's not necessarily a marketing's job, but it will definitely affect what's happening. And then product, obviously. So some regions might need certain features, like as Greg was talking about, privacy. Some regions might have certain privacy issues which you might not be ready to address within the product, or they might have certain ways of doing stuff. And again, it's not marketing's job to fix that, but it will significantly affect any kind of go-to-market in that region if the pricing or the product are missing or wrong for that application in that country.
Yeah, so like in tech, an obvious one would be like say your product has been really, like, one of the things that's been really successful is that your product integrates really well with a certain CRM system. Do you know, for instance, in all these new markets that your leadership wants to launch to, how many people use that particular CRM system? And there's that saying, behind every great marketer is a great product. And it doesn't matter how good you are as a marketer in your territory. Like, if your product isn't fit in the same way for country X, you're probably not going to be a great marketer in country X, even if you hire like a really shit hot local agency or freelancers or whatever.
Basically never. And on the people side, I think senior leaders also shouldn't just expect that if you are in the HQ and you set up something regionally, that it means that the people who are regional are going to always need to dance to the HQ's tune. Because I think that's one of the mistakes that I see a lot of businesses make. It's like, well, if the communication between the teams breaks down, but that's because you've gone, yeah, no, we're going to dictate everything out of HQ, and then we're going to expect, like you say, the regions to kind of just replicate what we're doing. They've got no sense of autonomy or no sense of how do we actually input back into your global strategy from a regional perspective. Then you kind of already lose the kind of willingness to work together. And that is, to me, that's like one of the most critical bits. Like, it's you might have a great product, you might have great marketers, but if you guys can't communicate properly with each other, then you're kind of done for.
This is a really small example, but like one from Lidu, for instance, is quite early on, I got a request from one of our sales team in Finland that he wanted to use marketing budget to pay for a like reasonably small scale print advertising, but tied to his local municipality that he lived at in Finland. So like he had like the city chamber of commerce and like the council for the city that he lived in. And he just came to me like it was a normal request. Like, I really want marketing budget to take out some ads in all of their collateral. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, we're a tech company. Like, I don't do printed ads. Why the hell am I going to pay for this? But he fair play. He made like a quite impassioned case for it, and it's worked. Like, he gets a lot of business from, it's reasonably big city in Finland. He gets like a lot of business from local businesses and people within the area who view those pieces of collateral from the council and the chamber of commerce as really quite authoritative things, and those ads have paid off. And like, that's something I would never think to do. Like, I would never think to like take out an ad in the London Evening Standard about Lidu. But for him, it worked, and for them, that's a completely normal way of businesses finding out about suppliers and ultimately giving business. So great, and without him being quite insistent that like, no, we should be doing this, I would never have signed that off. So that's just like a complete gap in my knowledge, but I can't do that without someone who understands how this actually works being an advocate for it.
So to wrap us up, we would love to know if there's any marketing gossip that's been on your mind, maybe an ad that you've seen lately online, or maybe just people doing stuff, some trends, anything like that.
I don't know if it's so much gossip as something that makes me despair, but like the general some of the stuff that I look at and see on LinkedIn recently is just like, I don't get it. So there's a lot of I'm sure a lot of people in marketing have seen, like, there's quite a few thought leaders and gurus being quite what would I say, being quite just explicit and antagonistic towards like companies and products that they've used and don't like, or that they've been, they feel like they've been screwed over, as a supplier or whatever. So like one that's, you can't miss it on LinkedIn at the minute, is RB2B, Adam Robinson. He's having like a very public feud with 6 Sense, and like I kind of get it, in the sense that like, okay, it's a professional network, we talk about what happens to us at work, but I don't understand how it's gone from like a site that people use to find jobs and talk about themselves and promote themselves to like, we're going to have like WWE style smackdowns about like what tech products we're using.
I've told you my theory is that this is where we used to do this on Twitter. Twitter is no more. X is no good. And now they've all come over to LinkedIn. And literally, I'm sure if some very clever person wants to pinpoint the timeline that these shit posts started happening on LinkedIn, it's around the same time that X kind of went down the toilet, and all of the marketing Twitter gang who are all really into these kind of like, let's have a go at everybody, let's pile on, all moved over to LinkedIn. So I blame Elon Musk.
Make LinkedIn great again. And on that, we will wrap up this episode. Thank you very much. Greg is in the blameitmarketing.com community, so if you want to chat to him one-on-one, he is there. Any other news or things that I should be talking about, Emma? I don't think so. No. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode.